Hi, hope all you are doing safe. Today this video is about balance of trade, exchange rates and international competitiveness. Form 7 Economics first term content. In this video I will be covering the chapters 28, 29, 30 and 31 of Unit 4. Let us now look at the learning objectives of this video. Getting to know the components of the balance of payment. Understand the causes and effects of current account imbalances. Understand the measures that the government could take to reduce such imbalances. Understanding the different types of exchange rates. Understand the government intervention in the currency market. Understand the impact of changes in exchange rates. Understand the concept of international competitiveness and the factors affecting it. Understand the measures to increase the international competitiveness of a country. Let us first look at what balance of payment means. Basically, this is the record of international transactions of a country with the rest of the world. For an example, we'll take Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka trades with almost all the countries in the world. So whatever the transactions that happen between Sri Lanka and the rest of the world will be recorded under the balance of payment. This is the official document where Sri Lanka's trade dealings with the rest of the world will be recorded. Let us now look at the components of the balance of payment. It usually comprises of the current account and the capital and financial account. These are the main two components of the balance of payment. Under the current account, we record all the purchases and sales of goods and services along with the primary and secondary income flows. That means, for an example, suppose we are exporting tea to 36 other countries. So the export of Sri Lankan tea will be recorded in the current account as a credit. And assume we are importing raw materials for the DSI company. Then the imported raw materials will be recorded as a debit under the current account. Also, the income that the country gets from residents working in other countries is also recorded under the current account. Let us now look at what capital and financial account represents. Capital account records the credits and debits of non-produced capital transfers between countries like sale of land to foreign embassies and also sale of shares. There, it is not the consumable goods and services that are being transferred, but capital will be transferred, shares, sale of lands, etc. Financial account. It records the financial capital in and out of the country. For an example, foreign direct investment flows, portfolio investments and other investments done by a country. Let us now look at the reasons for international capital flows on the financial account of the balance of payment. The first reason is speculators looking for quick profits. We know speculators are people who buy and sell currencies with the aim of making a profit at profitable times when the exchange rate increases. So, due to the actions of the speculators, they will always continue buying and selling currencies until they find a situation where they could earn a profit by selling the currency at a higher price than what they bought it for. The second reason is FDIs are increasing in order to take advantage of the cheap labor. As we have discussed in previous videos, most of the developing countries are attracting transnational companies to locate in their countries. This is because in developing countries the labor cost is relatively high. So, when transnational companies locate in developing countries, it brings huge flows of FDIs to that country, which will be recorded under the financial account of the balance of payment. Also, individuals transfer money between countries due to various reasons. Now, for an example, if I have shares in a Spanish company, I would transfer my money between Sri Lankan banks and Spanish banks. There would be a lot of transactions that would be done between my account and the Spanish bank account. Likewise, when the lives of people are advancing, the money that they have will be transferred across many countries. Let us now look at the relationship between current capital and the financial accounts of the balance of payment. The current and capital account balances shows whether the country is a net lender to the world or a net borrower from the world. Financial account is the counterpart of the balance of payment. So basically, financial account equals capital account balance plus the current account balance. Let us now look at the causes of surpluses and deficits on the current account. Overspending of the consumers and the government. Usually, a deficit in the current account shows that the country is spending over their limits. So, they will have to borrow money from other countries to finance the deficit. This causes economic instability if it is continued for a very long. For an example, if we import goods and services more than what we can pay for, then we will be owing to the rest of the world, to our trading partners. In order to pay for the imports that we have done, we will have to borrow from other countries. If this goes on, there will be an economic instability which will be created. Exchange rates. Some governments keep the exchange rate artificially low to hike the demand for their exports. This will lead to a surplus in the current account as imports are discouraged due to higher prices. When our exports become cheaper, our exports will become more competitive in the foreign market, ensuring that there is a strong demand for the exports of our country. And also, when the exchange rate is lower, the imports will become expensive in the domestic market, causing consumers to demand less of the imported products. This is also advantageous to the domestic producers as imports are now less demanded. Domestic demand. If the aggregate demand of the country is high, the citizens will anyway demand more imports. So, leads to a deficit in the current account. That is because if the aggregate demand is high, the country's productive potential would not be able to cater to the increasing demand. So, a country will anyway have to rely on imported products in order to fulfill the demand of the citizens. Inflation. If the domestic inflation rate is high, it will lead to a reduction in the price competitiveness of exports and finally a deficit in the current account. That means if the inflation in Sri Lanka is higher than the inflation in China, then the tea that we are exporting to India will be of higher price than the tea that is imported from China. So, our tea will be exported our tea that we have exported to the Indian market will be expensive than the Chinese tea which is exported to India. So in that situation, the demand for Sri Lankan tea will come down. Therefore, less demand for the exports means there will be a deficit in the current account. We will quickly investigate the measures to reduce the imbalances in the current account. Exchange rate changes. By devaluing or depreciating a currency, an economy can lower the export prices, making exports more competitive in the foreign market. Also, this will make the imports more expensive. As we discussed in the previous slides, when the currency value is lowered, our exports will become more competitive in the foreign market. Also, imports will become expensive in the domestic market, making consumers demand less imports. This approach will also result in an expenditure switching policy. This means consumers will switch from high-priced imports to low-priced local goods. This is beneficial for the domestic producers as they get a chance of expanding their business operations, and also they get a chance to capture the market share in the domestic market and successfully compete against the imports. Supply side policies. We know supply side policies are anyway designed to reduce labor cost, increase investment, increase the skills of the workforce, which will improve the quality of the product. So, if we are able to increase the productivity and the productive potential of the country through supply side policies, we would be able to correct the imbalances in the current account. Protectionism. Protectionism mechanisms such as tariffs, quotas, embargoes will limit the quantity of imports coming into a country and thereby correcting the prevailing deficit in the current account. We know once a tariff is imposed, it makes the imports expensive, so it becomes less competitive in the domestic market. For an example, if a tariff was imposed on an imported shampoo, the price of the shampoo will be high. But if the Sri Lankans can find a local brand in the market at a cheaper price, they would definitely go for the domestic product rather than for the imported product unless they are concerned about the brand, unless they are brand loyal. So, protectionism mechanisms can be used to discourage the quantity of imports that are being consumed by the local citizens. Significance of global trade imbalances. Imbalances can be measured in two ways. Imbalances in the current account of the BOP and imbalances in the assets owned abroad or borrowings from abroad. However, a deficit in the current account would not be considered as a problem if the country has borrowed money to help finance the long-term growth of the country. That means if whatever the money that has been borrowed was invested to finance the growth of the country, then such current account deficits are not considered as a problem because in the future the economy is ensured to be growing. So, even though we are experiencing a deficit right now, in the future the economy would prosper. And also, if the money that is being borrowed can be easily repaid with the inflows to the financial account. That means whatever the money that we have borrowed or whatever the money that is owing, if it can be easily repaid with the inflows that the country is getting to the financial account, then also a deficit in the current account is not considered as a problem. However, a current account deficit is considered as a problem if the country cannot finance the deficit with the inflows to the financial account. It will indicate a lack of competitiveness for a country. That means earlier we told that if the money that is being borrowed can easily be repaid, then there is no problem of having a current account deficit. But here what we are saying is, if the country cannot finance to pay the deficit, then it would be a problem. The inflows to the financial account is not sufficient to repay the money that we have borrowed. Then such current account deficits are considered as a problem. Also, it indicates that the country lacks international competitiveness. Due to all these, the currency of the country will depreciate. After discussing about the balance of payment, let us quickly move and look at the exchange rate systems. Right. First of all, let us get to know what an exchange rate is. Exchange rate is the value of one currency in terms of another. For an example, 1 US dollar equals 1.5 euros. So we are given the value of US dollars in terms of euros. This could be 1 US dollar equals 0.5 Sri Lankan rupees. That is, we are comparing US dollars with Sri Lankan rupees. Let us now look at the types of exchange rate systems. We have fixed exchange rate system, floating exchange rate system, and managed exchange rate system. Fixed exchange rate system. This is where the currency will have a fixed value against another currency. The forces of demand and supply does not vary the fixed exchange rate. That means it is controlled by the government. Demand and supply cannot influence the exchange rate that is being set. At the sole discretion of the government, once in a time they will alter the exchange rate. Other than that, it would be the set value of one currency in terms of another which will be considered as the exchange rate. After a period of time, the government will evaluate the economic situations, and if necessary, they will make necessary adjustments to the exchange rate in a fixed exchange rate system. Managed exchange rate system. This is more or less a combination of floating and fixed exchange rate systems. Exchange rate is determined by the market forces of demand and supply, but the government will also play some role in determining the exchange rate. They will have some power to change the exchange rate that is determined by the forces of demand. Government intervention in the currency market. Most of the countries use managed exchange rate system where demand and supply as well as the government will intervene. If the government wants to increase or decrease the value of a currency, they can directly intervene and get it done, because in a managed exchange rate system, there is 50-50 power for the demand and supply as well as for the government. Quantitative easing. This is a monetary policy tool where the central banks will buy financial assets in exchange for money in order to increase lending and borrowing in an economy. This is also a way the government can use to change the value of their currency. Quantitative easing has the effect of lowering the interest rates for any type of financial asset which the central bank buys as a part of its policy of quantitative easing. It also indirectly lowers other interest rates. Commercial banks can offer lower interest deals to their borrowing customers because the central bank has provided them with more cash to lend out. So quantitative easing will cause the value of the currency to fall. For an example, quantitative easing by the European Central Bank would reduce the interest rates in the Eurozone. European Central Bank, if they apply quantitative easing, it would reduce the interest rates in the Eurozone countries. International investors will have less incentive to buy Eurozone assets as they are getting a less return. Since the interest rate is lower, the potential investors will have less incentive to buy or invest in the Eurozone. So, they demand less currency of euros. Accordingly, the value of the currency will depreciate. Relative inflation rates. Usually, the nominal exchange rate shows the current exchange rate in the market, which would be determined by market forces of demand and supply. But real exchange rate shows the exchange rate in comparison to the cost of living in one country with the other. For example, the exchange rate is say $1 equals 1.80 Sri Lankan rupees. That is the nominal exchange rate. But the real exchange rate would compare the cost of living in USA as well as Sri Lanka. That is adjusted to the inflation. The third factor which affects floating exchange rate systems is the current account of the balance of payment. Let us now look at what will happen when the demand for exports are changing. For an example, suppose the demand for UK exports is increasing in USA. So, USA will need more UK pounds to pay for the increased exports. So, the demand for the currency will also increase when the demand for exports increase. This is because USA have to pay UK in their currency, not from the USA's currency. UK will only accept pounds in the payments. They do not accept USA's dollars when making the payments. So, USA will have to transfer their currency to UK pounds in order to pay for the exports from UK. If the demand for exports are falling, the demand for UK pounds will also increase. Let us now look at the demand for imports. If UK demands a lot of imports from USA, UK will have to supply more pounds to the foreign exchange market and buy more dollars to pay for the imports. So the supply of pounds will increase and the exchange rate will decrease. We know when the supply increases, the exchange rate or the price will decrease. The next factor is the strength of the economy. A weaker economy reduces the exchange rate, whereas a stronger economy increases the exchange rate. That is obviously when the economy is weak and when they are not performing well, the strength of the currency reduces. But if a country is performing well and has a strong economic growth, the value of the currency will increase. Let us now look at the impact of changes in exchange rates. Increasing in the exchange rate to make it stronger in a fixed exchange rate system is known as revaluation. That means we are increasing the value of our currency in terms of the other. Revaluation happens in a fixed exchange rate system. Decreasing the exchange rate to make it weaker in a fixed exchange rate system is known as devaluation. So the terms revaluation and devaluation comes in a fixed exchange rate system. Exchange rate is purely determined by the market forces of demand and supply in a floating exchange rate system. When the currency gets stronger in terms of another, it is called appreciation of the currency. For an example, earlier the exchange rate was $1 equals 1.2 euros. Now it has appreciated to $1 equals 1.5 euros. So, when it comes to a floating exchange rate system, an increase in the currency is known as appreciation, whereas in a fixed exchange rate system it is called as revaluation. Here the only difference is the different names of the two systems. But ultimately what happens in appreciation as well as revaluation is the value of the currency is increasing. Now as per this example, with $1 earlier they were able to buy only 1.2 euros. But now with $1 they are able to buy 1.5 euros. When the currency gets weaker in terms of another, it is called as depreciation of the currency. So in a fixed exchange rate system, it is called as devaluation. Here also devaluation and depreciation is more or less the same. The only difference is that the two exchange rate systems are different. For an example, earlier the exchange rate was $1 equals 1.2 euros. Now it has depreciated to $1 equals 1.0 euros. So earlier they were able to buy 1.2 euros with $1. Now they can buy only a lesser quantity of euros, that is only 1 euro for $1. So the ability of buying the currency has decreased. Effects of depreciation or devaluation on the current account of the balance of payment. As we have discussed earlier, when the value of our currency falls, our exports become more competitive in the foreign market. Therefore, the quantity of exports done will increase. And also, the imports will become expensive in the domestic market, making it less demanded, and the value of total imports done will reduce. Overall, there will be an improvement in the current account of the balance of payment because the credits are higher than the debits in the current account, ultimately resulting a surplus in the current account of the balance of payment. Marshall-Lerner condition. It states that given very specific conditions, the falling value of a currency will result in an improvement on the current account if the combined price elasticities of imports and exports are greater than 1. That means the price elasticity of exports as well as the price elasticity of imports total should be greater than 1. Then the value of the currency falling will improve the current account. J-curve effect. This means once a currency is depreciated, initially after depreciation, the current account balance will worsen and then only it will start improving. At the initial stage, we can see after having the current account balance stable, once we depreciate the currency, it starts to fall and then again only it has increased. This is what we know as the J-curve effect. Effects of changes in the value of a currency. Rate of inflation. As we have discussed, when the currency value changes or depreciates, imports become expensive. But this would be a problem for the firms who are importing raw materials. So the cost of the raw materials imported would increase, and finally the total cost of production would rise. So a depreciation in the currency gives rise to a cost push inflation as the cost of producing a product has increased with the increase in the cost of raw materials. Economic growth. In long term, depreciation of a currency will speed up the economic growth of a country as there is a strong demand for the exports. Also, a reduction in the value of the currency will attract more foreign direct investments into the country as the country seems more attractable for the investors. When more foreign direct investments are attracted, the capital and the financial account of the balance of payment will also succeed. International competitiveness. It is the ability of a country to compete effectively in the international market. It could be a small firm exporting to a very limited number of countries, or a big transnational company exporting to majority of the world. The ability of the firm to participate in the market effectively and to deal with the trading activities effectively is what we call as the international competitiveness. Based on several factors, the international competitiveness of a country definitely changes from time to time. Measures of international competitiveness. Relative productivity rates. A rise in relative productivity will improve the international competitiveness of a country. A rise in the multi-factor productivity measures the productivity of both labor and capital. The reason why we refer to relative productivity here is we are comparing ourselves with another country and saying we are more productive. When comparing two countries, we could be more productive. That is why we call it relative productivity. Here the idea that we should get is whether we are more successful in the productivity than another country who has the best international competitiveness. That is why we are comparing two countries. So if the productivity in our country is high, definitely the cost of production and the efficiency in our country is superior. So the competitiveness of our country will be higher or improved than the comparing country, the competing countries. And also, multi-factor productivity measures the productivity of both labor and capital. It is not just the labor productivity, but there the capital productivity is also considered. Relative unit labor cost. A rise in the relative unit labor cost will reduce the international competitiveness of a country as products become more expensive in the foreign market, responding to increased labor cost. That means when we compare ourselves with another country, if our country has a high labor cost, then obviously our products will become more expensive. As the cost of production is higher, we will want to sell at a higher price in the foreign market to cover up the cost. So, when the labor cost increases, the international competitiveness of a country decreases. But if a country is able to produce the product at a lower unit labor cost, then of course the international competitiveness of the country will be improved. Relative export prices. This measure compares the export prices of our commodities with the prices of exports of our main trading partners. So, falling the export prices increase the competitiveness of a country. That means, suppose India imports tea from Sri Lanka and China, both the countries. So, if our products are expensive than the Chinese tea, then of course in the Indian market, Sri Lankan tea will be demanded less as it is expensive. and Chinese tea will be demanded more. But if our products are cheaper than the Chinese imports to India, then of course we would be more international competitive in India than China. So always we should compare our prices with the other trading partners and set a price which is lower than the others so as to ensure competitiveness of the country's product. Factors influencing competitiveness. Productivity. If the productivity in our country is high, as we discussed, it would increase the competitiveness. Quality of human capital. That means if the labor force in our country is more experienced and skilled, of course we would be able to produce a quality product at a lower cost. So the international competitiveness of the country will increase. Exchange rates. A reduction or a devaluation of the currency improves the international competitiveness as exports become cheaper and imports become expensive. So the exports from our country going into the global market would be more competitive than the other products produced in the other countries. Wage and non-wage factors. As we have discussed, if the wages and the non-wage factors relating to employment is lower, then of course the production companies would be able to produce at a lower cost than other countries. That is why for developing countries are attracting a lot of foreign direct investments. The labor cost is lower. So if a developing country or a country is able to produce at a lower wage cost and other cost related to employment is lower, then the cost of production at the end would be lower, increasing the competitiveness. Regulations. That means the government's policies that promotes competitiveness, the support given by the government in order to increase the international competitiveness of businesses. Measures to increase the international competitiveness. Improve education and training. As we all know, if we invest in education and training, it would increase the quality of human capital. So when there is a quality supply of human capital and when majority of the workers are skilled and qualified, of course the efficiency level would be high, the productivity level would be high, and the cost of errors, cost of wrongdoings would be very less. So increasing or improving the education and training given to the workforce would increase the international competitiveness. Investment incentives. That means the government could encourage investments to take place. That is on research and development, on how new products can be developed, and also about how production techniques could be improved to ensure efficiency. Likewise, the government should encourage businesses to do investments and to do research and find out the best and the least cost-effective methods of production. Privatization and deregulation. Public sector firms are anyway known to be inefficient. So privatization and deregulation would ensure that the inefficiencies in the public sector corporations and the public owned businesses are no longer, as they are given to the hand of the private sector. And in deregulation, the rules imposed by the government are loosened so as to give more freedom for businesses. So both these options would increase the freedom and increase the efficiency of businesses, ultimately resulting a higher international competitiveness. Trade liberalization. Increasing the free trade between countries makes exports cheaper in the foreign market as it is free from trade barriers. So trade liberalization also ensures that a product is competitive in the foreign market. Taxation. Once the taxes are reduced, the cost of production will come down. But if a tax is increased, if the government is charging higher rates of taxes from businesses, the cost of production would increase, finally reducing the international competitiveness. But if the government wants to increase the international competitiveness, they might as well reduce the tax rates in order to encourage businesses to engage more in production and thereby supply to the international market at a lower price, exploiting economies of scale. Benefits of being international competitiveness. Current account surplus. When we become more competitive in the foreign market, of course, the demand would be high for the exports. Therefore, the credits become higher than the debits, ultimately resulting in a current account surplus. Employment. Once a country is highly competitive in the foreign market, what happens? There will be a lot of employment opportunities that will be open, with the export industry becoming a success. So most of the people will be able to find jobs in the export industry of a country. Economic growth. With all these factors, the economy will experience a growth as a majority of the people are now being employed, and also the current account is experiencing a surplus. Wage growth. The workers would be able to increase the wages and salaries that they are getting once the economy is growing. And also the demand for workers are also high when the requirement for labor is high. So they are in a position to demand higher wages than before. Higher domestic purchasing power. With the increase in economic growth and also with the wage growth, the domestic citizens will get a higher purchasing power. When their salaries increase, they would be able to afford more goods and services. And also, economic growth ensures higher GDP per capita. So with all these, the domestic purchasing power of the citizens will increase. Hope everything is clear. We have come to the end of the video. Thank you for watching.